Welcome back to a special edition, a summer edition of the Sport Management Office Hours podcast. I'm joined today by Victor Anderson, who is currently an account manager for ticketing, service, and activations for the PWHL Seattle. And Victor, welcome to the podcast.
I'm excited. I know you and I are both kind of on break here, so very nice that we are able to find some time in our busy schedule. So I'm pumped and excited to be on.
Yeah, thank you again. So we took about a month off to kind of decompress and wrap up finals and graduation and everything in June. And so now we're back and we're diving right back into it. And this is a kind of our first, I don't want to say a crossover, but you have your own podcast as well. And we'll get into that later. But I think there's some overlap here for sure. So let's start off with this. Can you briefly walk us through your journey into the sports industry? I know it's not been a straight line. And what sparked your interest, particularly in ticket sales?
Yeah, it's a long story, but I will use the kind of like spark notes in a way to make it a little bit faster. So when I was younger, I was born in Russia and I was adopted by obviously a great family. They gave me a lot of opportunities, and when I was younger, sports was always something that really grabbed my attention. And when you're trying to find like friends as well, when you're speak a different language and stuff, it's pretty difficult. So the fact that I was able to play hockey, soccer, I did swimming for like 1 year. My mom thought I was gonna be Michael Phelps, and then I was like, "Hey, have you seen me swim? Like, I'm not even be remotely close. I think I couldn't even tread water, so I definitely don't like
Hmm.
being out by myself. But what came down to is I played hockey in high school, and I was like, either I try to play professional hockey, which I knew was going to happen, but when you're a young kid, you think you're going to go pro no matter what. You don't care who's way better than you. Um, and so it was between St. Cloud State and University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, and big decision for me was trying to figure out what was going to be best for my career versus just an ego thing where, hey, I want to go play and say I played for this team, even if I'm on the fourth line or even
Right.
playing rec. And so, University of Wisconsin-La Crosse had a sports management program. St. Cloud State didn't have any. So I looked at it as a better decision to go and get a career in sports where I wanted to. But I think the biggest thing also came down to like I had no clue what sports could offer. All I knew was
Mm.
you could be a coach, you could be a player, athletic trainer, and that was pretty much it. I assumed there was some kind of ticket sales there because people obviously are trying to sell on season tickets. But when I went to University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, my plan was to grow their organization to that next level, and I felt like being at a smaller college, I had that opportunity versus being at a D1 college like St. Cloud. You're kind of just a number. So
Hmm.
went through that process at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. We had to do two essentially kind of like walk arounds or like we had to go
Like
different
job shadowing?
job shadowing. Exactly. See, already fumbling the words here.
No, you're good.
But yeah, we had to do two job shadows, and this is a great story for me. I've listened to your guys' podcast as well, talk about crazy things. For me, I just reached out to the University of Minnesota to their HR department because it's like their job's to reach back out to me, right? Like that's literally their job description. So I reached out there and said, hey, I would like to learn more about the operation side, specifically on ticket sales and service, because everyone says ticket sales it's not for them, but I don't want to close any doors, and so was
Hmm.
able to get a response right back. I thought it was I thought it was a joke. I was like, "There's no chance you just respond right away." When it took me 20 minutes to type it up, but you
Hmm.
said, "Yeah, let's find someone that would be interested to help you." And so that was Travis Cameron, who's now the assistant director at the U of M, chief revenue officer. He might have gone up in our title. Great guy overall, but really helped me kind of go through all different departments, sponsorships, sales, game day operations. Just a great guy in general, and always has my back. So from there, I knew that sports was a path for me. And then when I was in college, like the networking piece was so important for me to excel and help people around me. I tend to be a person who likes to help people, but also at the same time, like you have to do your work. Like just because I give you, people to reach out to, like I can't from there, that's where you can kind of figure out how to build those connections over time. So from there, obviously, was able to network my way, get some positions with Iowa Wild on the ticket sales side, and ultimately, I looked at it like ticket sales. Believe it or not, it's one of the easier things to get into,
Hmm.
primarily because a lot of people want to do social media marketing, analytics, which I didn't really want to do, frankly. I like to talk to people and also make them, when they say no, try to make them say yes, and joke around and stuff. So found success there. And then from there was just like you said, just networking helped me tremendously with just moving different positions, and was out of sports for a little part of time with enterprise, but learned a ton there on the management side. Now, obviously, in the account manager role, new team, a lot of things you're learning, but just a great atmosphere, and I'm excited to obviously keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. Your path is like many. It's not a straight line. You just need to wait for the breaks to happen, and sometimes you need to force them to happen. So, and that's part of what you do, right? And then you also co-founded Front Office U, which is a podcast for anybody that might not know. And so, what kind of inspired that creation? Because I think it came around graduation time, right? That you started this podcast.
Yeah, it actually started kind of during the pandemic, but I got the position in Iowa, and nothing against Iowa people in general, but there's not much to do in Iowa, and that could just be me. I just didn't find too much success, so I was like, all right, I want to push myself to the next level. And in ticket sales, obviously, you call people, and the first 5 calls, I was like sweating. I was like, man, this is crazy. And then I thought about it. I was like, so I literally call my parents, I'm fine. I call other people, I'm fine. I network with people. Like, why am I so like tense and stuff? And so, luckily, I had networked with some other colleges and some friends of mine, and we got literally a networking call. I was like, guys, like, what if we did a podcast? Like, obviously, pretty easy to say that you'll do a podcast, but
Hmm.
following through it is really hard to do, frankly. And you guys know that as well. Just so much is thrown at you. But what it came down to is like we wanted to help other people. We wanted to bridge the gap, and we also wanted to have a platform where like all the people that we have on the podcast, they're willing to talk to anyone that reaches out to them. So looking back at it, it's pretty crazy. We're now moving kind of to YouTube. So I've been kind of obviously looking at your guys' videos and trying to critique what we can do to make it look, as cool as possible. But yeah, it just came down to like all of us had the same goal, and I mean, we have a lot of people now we added on the team, but overall, like you need a team. So the fact
Hmm.
that it's just, you and Brandon, it's like, that's crazy to me because it's just so much to do on the podcast side. And people don't realize that. A lot of people do quit after a couple months because it's too tough. But I mean, we're essentially coming up here for 4 years, over 170 episodes. And we're just, excited to be able to help that, and help the people who like maybe aren't the most outgoing individuals.
Yeah, you're doing it from the student and professional side of things, and we're looking at it from like the professor side of things, right? The educational side of things. So I think that's where there's a great overlap here, and I can relate with the podcast thing, right? So like same thing during COVID. I have a friend who's a coach who we would talk daily during commutes, and we were thinking, why don't we just turn this into a podcast? All it is a conversation. That's all a podcast is. And so the first few podcasts were just figuring it out. How do we even start? Like that's the hardest part of starting. We got nicer microphones just to have the sound quality up a little bit, but that wasn't all that important. What was important is just getting something out that was decent and going from there. And yeah, I think we did 125 episodes, like every week basically for over 2 years, and then eventually let that go because it is a monster, and you run out of things to talk about, and you run out of guests, and you don't want to just put stuff out for the sake of putting stuff out, but that's how you stay relevant. And then the second podcast, I started producing podcasts, so it was a little bit easier because now it's like, all right, well, you figure out what you're going to talk about, you just send me the video and I will put it all together, add sponsors, do all that stuff. And that was a lot nicer because I got to work with some people that had bigger roles. The most recent one was a broadcaster for ESPN running his personal podcast, and it's like, okay, I like being on this side as well. But when I talked to Brandon, I said I think there's a gap here that we're a lot of us professors work at small colleges, and there's maybe only one of us in our department, maybe two. And so, who do you talk to for ideas? Like, you get this job in Iowa, in Minnesota, and you're not at a big public school. Who do you talk to for ideas? You can't just wait for the conference every year to get new ideas. So we figured, we found each other through professional networks, and everyone we find now is through, again, professional networks and things like that. But now it's just having those conversations publicly so that other people can be like, you know what, that is a great idea. I can take something from this. And now I have people that I can text and say, hey, what do you think about this idea for a lesson? And I actually have a network that I've built that way. And I'm sure it's the same thing for you when you're working with people that are looking for a certain position. Well, I don't know, but I know someone who does. Let's connect you. And so, the podcast is partially for other people. It's also just for us. If no one listened, I'd still get something out of it. And it doesn't cost that much money to run. It doesn't cost any money to run, really, just time. And so, yeah, that's how we do it. But I can completely relate. So I'm happy you're sticking with it. You guys have a good cadence. A team of 5 or 6 certainly does make things easier. Who can host this week, and who are you hosting? That's way easier. Brandon and I sometimes are like, we just do it bi-weekly when we're on schedule. Right now we're all a little bit off, but it's difficult to say, all right, who do we have this month? And with professors, everybody's got time constraints and everyone's busy, and so it's hard to lock people down and stay on schedule, because you might have a perfect guest and they're like, I can't do anything for 2 months. So now you're scrambling. So like I get the stuff that you're going through, and yeah, I do appreciate the resource because I think it's great. So speaking of that, you've done 100+ episodes. You've learned a lot. You've been in the sports industry now. You've networked. You're doing all the things. So let me ask you some advice for students first. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see students or young professionals make when they're trying to work their way into the sports industry?
I would say like the title. I mean, I believe it or not, looking back at when I was with the Sounders, the biggest thing for me was like I saw other people grow faster, and I felt like it was because I was, overlooked or something. But I think the biggest thing is like it was part of an ego, and thinking that just because some of your coworkers are ahead of you doesn't necessarily mean you're not on this right track. You're just on a different essentially like path to the sports industry. So like, I mean, I talk to students across the U.S. and Canada even, and like the biggest thing they always talk about is like, well, I want this. I need to be it needs to be paid, like all this stuff. And like, we talk on our podcast, like a lot of us did internships and stuff to add value. And for our podcast, like the biggest thing too is we want to add people who like maybe aren't in sports right now. Like we have one guy who works at the box office, but he's still looking for his full-time role in sports. He just hasn't had that opportunity. And so putting yourself out there is huge. But it's also one of those things where I don't really recommend, like if someone was to say, hey, do you recommend this person for a position? If I hadn't worked with them, or if I don't trust them to a certain extent where I built that connection over a couple of years, like I usually just say, hey, like I think he's a great person. I just don't know enough to, make that recommendation. So I think a lot of people, as we see and you probably see as well, they'll reach out if a position's open. They're like, oh, well, you work there. Like you obviously know someone, like put me in there. And that's kind of what's going on with right now with the PWHL. We have a ton of new teams and stuff, and people are reaching out, which is great, which I love. But like you have to be proactive. You have to reach out sooner than later. Like we all knew that the PWHL Seattle and Vancouver were, going to come.
Mm-hmm.
Why reach out later? And to first of all, I have no say for it. I can say
Right.
you're a great person, but I think the biggest mistake is people just look at the title and then they look at whoever's in that position. They're like, all right, I'm going to message them. And like everyone that gets messages like that, I can tell you for the most part, like they'll be like, okay, like, yeah, I'll pass it over. How many people do? I mean, frankly, for me, it's like I can't do much. I'd rather you have built that relationship over time so I can go to my director, I can go to my VP and say, hey, like this person's definitely someone I'd recommend. Obviously, you make the decision based off the organization, but I think that's like the biggest thing is a lot of people, and you probably, like I said, you probably have it quite a bit. They're always asking for like, hey, can I have this job? It's like, all right, like what have you been doing before? And for the podcast, like it's helped me, trust me, with like positions of like I doing more than just my job description at my job. I'm able to build relationships, and luckily from that being able to really good at sales and service, and sell a arena.
Yeah, we tell students all the time when they're looking for that way in, the connection. Like, do you know somebody over here? And I'm happy to introduce people and say, hey, this is a great student. You should talk to them if you have a moment. They would appreciate some advice. Like, I would appreciate it. And there are times when I'm like, I'm reaching way back into the network and saying, listen, I once, it was a high school teammate of mine that I just kind of followed along and realized, you know what? You're hiring for this position. This person would like to talk to you. Like, all I can say is they're a great guy. I think it's worth an interview, and you take it from there. And they end up getting the job, and that's great. But I also tell students, when you want to start networking, you should reach out and don't ask for a favor. Don't ask them to give you something, an internship right away. Like, just ask for a few minutes of their time. Ask if you can ask questions and try to build that mentor mentee relationship, because most people will say yes to something like that. Like, yes, I will answer your questions. Yes, I will give you a few minutes of my time. And then once they get to know you, then they will naturally try to, like, that will kind of build that relationship up. But you can't expect to reach out on a Monday, have questions answered on a Friday. All right, can you throw me in for this job next week? And so that's where the planning comes in. And so a lot of it is rushed. And so I guess a follow up to that question would be, so what advice would you give then to students who feel like they have zero industry connections? Because we do have people that come in and they're like, oh, well, my dad's buddy is the director of ticket sales at the Detroit Lions. Like, so I have a way in, I can get an internship, or something like that. Like, I know someone and I already have a little bit of an in. But most people, most of my students are coming from zero. Like, other than their high school coaches and athletic directors, they don't have any in into professional sports. Where do you recommend those people start?
Yeah, I always kind of relate it back to like sports. Like all of us were athletes for the most part. People who work in sports played some sport, even if it's pickleball or like something that like wasn't as big obviously back. Now pickleball is obviously has their own organization and everything there. I would say like the biggest thing I always recommend to people, and I have since day one, is like pick some teams that you're interested in essentially relocating to, working for, and then figure out what departments. And I would, do this obviously in college. Don't. I mean, at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, I can go over it multiple times, but people would always wait till senior year until like a month before they graduate, and then they would reach out to me like, "Hey, I'm about to graduate. Like, what should I do?" I'm like, "All right, man. Like, you're in the same class as I am. Like, what did you do?" And he's like, "Well, I mean, like I did some sports management classes." I'm like, okay, I did that as well. Like already I'm gonna be more qualified than you are on that because of my experiences. And so listening to podcasts are huge, right? Like listening to your guys' podcast, um, listening to other people's, our podcasts as well. Because like those people that are on there, they'll give you advice as well that you might not have to spend the time. And um, I now, instead of listening to music when I'm going to work, I listen to podcasts. And I can tell you that would never have happened if I didn't start a podcast, probably. But the other thing when it comes to people who don't have any experience is like you got to push yourself out of your comfort zone, and a lot of people do say that. But frankly, like for me, I was not the most outgoing kid. My junior year, I was just like a switch kind of turned on, like if I don't do this, someone else is, and then they're going to take my position, and that's a non-negotiable for me. So I reached out to people when people were going out to drink and stuff on the weekends. I was setting up calls and stuff, informational interviews, and
Mhm.
putting myself out there. And I'm like you said, like I'm also willing to send people other people to talk to, but you have to start the foundation from the beginning. And the easiest way is when you're a student, like people are going to listen to you a little bit more versus if you're out of college, it's a little bit harder. And so just kind of pushing yourself through there, reach out to me, reach out to you. I mean, like, gosh, like you have just as big of a outreach as well, just having worked so many cool positions and, with great individuals as well. And then your peers too, like talk to people who are in your class. That was the biggest adjustment for me. I finally went around and talked to everyone because I wanted to see, who they've connected with. And from there, like also helped me with just building confidence. So with no experience, like I don't think that should be an excuse. I think you should use that as a way to like start a podcast. Like even start a podcast. Like believe it or not, you learn way more on a podcast, especially on the sports side, than anyone can tell you. Social media, marketing, sales is essentially right, selling the podcast itself. Gosh, like it's basically an organization by itself. So um, long-winded answer, but I would definitely say
Mhm.
like the biggest thing is like use your resources when you can when you're at college and use your student kind of title in a way where you can really push yourself and your brand out there because that was the biggest thing for me is just pushing my brand out there, letting people know who I am. So then now when other people apply for positions like when my old friends, he got a position with the Iowa Wild because they knew me and they knew I was obviously a hard worker and stuff. So it just shows you the outreach you can have if you really apply yourself.
Yeah, you made a few good points there, all good points, but one in particular that stuck out to me was, well, a student waits till their senior year, then they start to, okay, now things are getting real. Where are the internships that I want? And I have always preached to my students that, you know, the classes and the coursework, they're going to help you do your job, but your experiences and your network are going to help you get your job, because everybody graduates with the same piece of paper, right? So that's not that interesting to an employer. Like they know you can do it, great. That's like the bare minimum. But like going out and finding your network and finding opportunities and volunteering and interning, that's what's going to open the door to actually get you the interview and get you the job. And so like that's such a missed out piece, I think. And so let's put you in my chair for a moment. As you're running a program, you're trying to help students get employed. This upcoming year we're starting a course that all freshmen have to take, where we basically force them and handhold them through this process, but the winter of their freshman year. And so it's basically exploring careers in sport is the whole premise of this. And they have to do informational interviews. They have to identify 2 or 3 jobs that they want and find 5 or 6 people that have those jobs and break down their careers and how they got there. And then they have to start creating like a roadmap of how do I get to where I want to get to. So if I want to do broadcasting, great. Freshman year, go over to the SID's office, ask them if you can help with the broadcast, get started, because those things stack, right? So, I had a student his freshman year, we didn't have a whole class dedicated to this. We just had the last week of intro to sport management dedicated to career planning. And he heard me say, this is what you have to do each year. This is how it builds. Here's where you can go look for jobs, teamwork online, Indeed, obviously, work in sports, NCAA marketplace. Like I gave him all of these places. And lo and behold, he went on teamwork and he moved to North Dakota to be an intern for the summer for a summer baseball league. Next year, he comes back. He's broadcasting every single home game for our sports or for our athletic department. Next summer, he goes out. He's now the main broadcaster for that same team that he started with. Comes home. Now he's an OHL announcer with the Saginaw Spirit for a little bit, working for USA Hockey. And, it just builds and builds and builds. So when he's a senior and he goes to apply for a real job, he has now worked his way up. He's got tape. He's got all of his experience. And so compared to someone that just says at the very end, oh, let me just try to grab whatever I can real quick, put a resume together and hope for the best. Well, that's why you're losing. It's because you're not prepared. Anybody can do that, but it's the people that have put years into it. And so that's difficult. Now, again, putting you in my chair, what other things would you recommend to professors that they do to help prepare students for the job market in sports?
Yeah, I mean, I want to echo first on like setting the foundation. Like that's so important for directors like yourself as well as just professors of like setting their students up for success. But there's only so much the professor can do because they don't know what you're doing. Obviously, on the backside, like you could be drinking. Like believe it or not, a lot of people in my sports management class, the biggest thing is they were going out on the weekends and not really caring about like they're like, oh, I got like you said, I got a year left, I'm fine. Like we're not an athlete, right? Like
Right.
we're not we're not getting paid big money NIL deals or anything like that. So I like that you brought that up of him just going through the process and realizing like you have to push yourself and moving different places is hard by itself. Trust me, it's expensive, but if you really want to work in sports, you're going to have to move throughout your career. Um, I would say the big one that I know you guys have been talking about as well, at least on the first episode that I was watching, is like the ticket sales side. I think it's such a easy thing to do, frankly. But like at our college, at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, my professor was talking about like, what would you think about sales? And I was like, you have to. Like, I joined the sales club at UWL. Obviously, wasn't good at all. I think I was out of the 7 people that went through the competition. I was last, but like at least it put me in that kind of uncomfortable position. So like the sales side, I think is huge of just like going through the reps and doing inside sales kind of like you guys were doing, partnerships with different teams. Like that's huge. So I'd say the sales side's like the number one thing. I think it's a non-negotiable. And if your organization's not doing it or your college isn't doing it, they're kind of doing you a disservice because I talk to people where they're like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, how about inside sales? They're like, well, I don't know what it's about. Like that's why it's inside sales. Like you learn about everything. And if you were able to do that in college, like you have more confidence and then you have that experience where a lot of these sales companies are looking for. So I think the inside sales part as well as like partnerships are huge. Um, Premium sales, like if you had like a sales program essentially where, hey, are you interested in inside sales with like, ticket sales? Are you interested in membership services, group sales, or like premium sales? And being able to pick one of those, I think it would help you because, there's a guy I'm talking to right now who he has a ton of corporate experience, but he hasn't been able to land a position and it's frustrating on his end. But in my mind, it's like you have to go through inside sales first because then they can tell that you're a grinder and you're going to get to that point. So just going through that step. So I think the sales side is kind of dead at times because people are like, I'm not doing that. But funny enough, a lot of the people that said they weren't doing it now, are doing it, and they're like, all right, well, I just wasted 2 or 3 years just saying I'm not going to do it. Now I'm doing it for a full time role.
Yeah. And so since you've listened to it, you might have already heard this, but we started off with a small project, which turned into a special topics course, which is now a full-fledged part of our program for ticket sales. And it's funny enough, shout out to Jeff Hager, who's now with F1 Las Vegas. But at the time, he took us on at the Detroit Lions, and it started off as simply group sales. Like that was our thing for the first 2 years. But then we started to get people more and more interested. And so we said, how do we add value to this without always doing the same training? So by the third year, I was able to do the group sales training because I'd been a part of it every year. And so then we moved on to the premium sales because I told Jeff, our students don't know anything behind the curtain in terms of suites, premium memberships, all of these things, and the different inventory. And the Lines being a full suite sales team, you can sell any product. So it's important to know that you might be selling, to a group of 50 students coming out for a game, or you might land a big suite. So you need to know the whole, ecosystem of sports sales. So yeah, no, it's very important. I think it's growing. I think there's more interest. Recently I talked to a school, a very big school, who said we'd love to add sales in some way. We just don't know how yet, how to integrate that. And so if anybody's out there listening and they're wondering how do we integrate it, like give us an email. Like we're happy to help you figure out how to add that to the curriculum, whether it be as part of a project in in a sport finance class because we can talk about revenue generation for weeks, or a standalone special topics or whatever it might be. But it is growing. It is. I have students all the time. I had a student last week that emailed me and said, "Hey, do you know of any positions in sales?" Like I took the after taking that course, I realized like I do think it's something I can do. And again, they wouldn't have known that if they had not taken the course. They just wouldn't know. And so it's just opening another door for people, and it happens to be a door in the sports world that's pretty open. You just have to be willing to put in the work. All right, so let's wrap up with talking about your podcast for a few minutes. So it's built around peer advice, shared learning. What's been the most surprising or insightful conversation that you've had so far? And that's putting you on the spot because I know you've done a bunch. So maybe just one of your favorites, I guess, is a more fair way of putting that.
Yeah, the cool part for us is, we obviously post on LinkedIn and we're able to kind of reach out and luckily the last couple months we've just had so much outreach that people have been wanting on the podcast and it's helped us. I say like the most inspiring one is like um, he works for Chronic Esports. I'm not going to put his name out there just in case, but he he in the podcast it was I was just blown away by this because I've never heard this on the sales side through across the board because a lot of it was like, oh, you got to grind, work every game. But how they're doing things, at least how he's operating or was operating, um, he basically said like I can either have account executives stay here for uh, 3 to 5 years, and like work half the games, or I can have account executives here for 1 or 2 years, working all the games. They leave sports all together, or just leave the
Mm-hmm.
organization as a whole. And he's like, in my mind, he's like, I have a wife. I need to make sure that she sees me more um, you know than if I was working all the games. So his biggest thing is like, if you are working a game, if you got everything done, go home. And I
Mm-hmm.
like appreciate that because like when I work with a lot of organizations, like I'm there from 7 a.m. to 10 or 12 p.m. just like doing everything and not really doing much because after the game, like there's only so much you could do. So he said like obviously it helps on payroll because people aren't there as long, but also mental health wise, like work life balance is huge in the sports industry. So that would like just really blew me away because I was like, man, I know very few people in the sports industry that like I would do that, but like at that point, I was like, man, I could see myself moving over to Colorado to work for him just because of like the what he does and cares about
Mm-hmm.
his team. It's huge, and unfortunately, you don't see many organizations that follow up with that. They might say they do, but ultimately, when you get there, it could be a full 360 turn.
Yeah, burnout in sports is very real, especially in ticket sales. So like hearing that, it's great, and I think it's maybe a leadership shift, a mentality shift in the industry because there's so much churn in that particular sector. So obviously, it's better off to have people long term because their book of business, their institutional knowledge. So it makes sense, right? So yeah, hopefully more people take that and hear that and implement that themselves. So where do you want your podcast to go in the future? Where do you hope to take it?
It's a loaded question, but my goal right now is to essentially obviously grow it on the YouTube channel. From
Mm-hmm.
there, like it'd be sick to do a partnership with Front Office Sports, something that I have kind of in the back of my head. But a lot of podcasts, as you probably are aware, as well as other people, is they push themselves too quickly and they kind of burn out. And it's similar in ticket sales and service, like yes, you can make 100+ calls a day, but you're probably be so burnt out, you're not going to be a person people want to hang out with, or just going to be miserable in general because you'll be there for too long. So, for where I want to see the podcast is obviously growing on YouTube. I think that's a platform that we can really see a little bit more outreach. Working on like the social media side, I'm really not the most social media guy, so it's hard to see that. But ultimately, like it'd be sick to get like a Front Office Sports like partnership or sponsorship in a way where like we're obviously front office use a little bit different. I don't know legal battle what that looks like, but we're still obviously a little bit smaller. But if we could, that's the goal is just like partner with them and have some kind of podcast there where like obviously it helps individuals. And then, my thing is always have like a free platform versus having to have it paid and stuff. I just don't believe in in that because there's too many things you have to pay for subscriptions. So I rather keep ours free and just
Mhm.
an opportunity for people essentially to see us on the global atmosphere.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure. Here's the thing with podcasts: as long as you keep it going and you keep the quality up, it can last forever. So it goes as far as you want to take it, and we can always talk off air about specifics and details about that. But I do really appreciate your time, Victor. I think it's great what you're doing is serving a really big population right now, which is students in sport management, which massive. I mean, tens of thousands, if not 100,000 students looking to get into sports, right? And they just don't know. And while you can't discuss everything you've learned in every lesson, you've done a great job of providing an explanation of what your podcast is and what it does. And all I can do now is just recommend wholeheartedly that students go check it out. And I know it'll probably be an assignment that I put together in my course where they have to go listen to an episode a week and tell me, like, that's the discussion post is go listen to Front Office U and then tell me what you learned from that particular interview. And I think I would recommend other people do the same because for us, our networks are limited to us, right, as professors. And you can tell the students until you're blue in the face to go network and do these things. But sometimes going and, like you said, learning from what other people are doing and letting other people kind of network for you, ask those questions for you in the podcast form is very valuable and very efficient, and that can help you kind of narrow your focus before you reach out to people. So thanks again, and I really appreciate it. And go check out Front Office U on Spotify, YouTube as well.